Hey there, Wargamers. Justin the Arm Painter here from Death Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to do some pre-shading and lay down some base colors with an airbrush. This is a question that comes up all the time on Twitch, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that today. To begin to explain the basics of pre-shading, I've selected two pieces here to work on for you guys. So let's go ahead and explain why I chose these. The first piece we've got here to work with is a Space Marine shoulder pad. Now, granted, this is not a whole model. This is, however, a curved surface where we'll be able to display some of the gradients across it. It is going to be different than the other piece that we've selected, and that's very important. The big difference here is that we've got one piece that has a rounded surface and another piece that is flat. Now, we've got a Space Marine Rhino hatch here, and the light's going to hit it from more of a vertical direction from the top. Like the Rhino hatch, the light is going to hit here and travel down the surface of the shoulder pad. However, the difference is the shoulder pad protrudes, whereas the Rhino hatch does not, so you can't simply spray from the top. Now, to begin here today, we started by priming the surface of the shoulder pad and the Rhino hatch gray. The reason we did that is because the color we're going to be working with today is blue, very similar to an Ultramarines blue. In this case, the gray is going to serve as our midtone because we're going to be coming into with a darker color from the bottom, black, and then we're going to be coming from the top with a lighter color, white. This is going to create a gradient, so when we spray the blue, we get a transition of colors naturally across the models, utilizing the transparent nature of the airbrush paint. With that being said, let's get ready to lay down some colors. So we're going to begin here with our Rhino hatch, and we're going to be laying down the shadow color with Stynylrez Res Black from Minotaur. Now we're using this because this works really well with the blue that we're going to be laying down later, but you can adjust the shadow color based on whatever your finish is going to be for your model. It is important to note that if your overall finish is going to be something other than blue, maybe yellow, white, or orange, or something like that, you may actually adjust the colors you use because those colors are going to go over something like a brown, for example, better than they will a black. So be aware of what you want your overall finish to be. In this case today, we're going to be using black for our shadow and white for our color from the top because blue carries over those very easily. One quick technique to remind you guys is that spraying some paint on the back of your hand before going on the model is a way to ruin a glove without ruining a model. Make sure you test your flow and your paint there before you start spraying. With that being said, let's get ready to lay down some paint on our hatch. We're going to begin by applying some black to the bottom here, and we'll be very careful to leave some of that gray in the middle. The theory here is we're going to create a gradient from dark at the bottom in this case to a lighter mid-tone to a bright tone from the top. Later on, when we apply our blue color for this particular Ultramarine hatch, it's going to be semi-translucent, so the colors underneath are going to give us the illusion of a gradient, which is exactly what we're going for. It's worth noting that when working with the airbrush, though, you should be doing multiple thin passes. Don't spray in one spot too long. You don't want the paint to pool or to run. You know, as Duncan would say, 2 thin coats, and that also applies for airbrushing. And with that, it looks like we're almost done, and we're going to let this dry, and we're going to transition over to applying the shadow portions to our shoulder pad. As we begin to prepare to work on our shoulder pad, it's worth noting that we need to be a little bit careful with how we target the areas for our shadows because the shoulder pad has a much smaller recess that we're going to be targeting, whereas the Rhino hatch over here has a much larger surface area, so it's a little bit easier to leave that gray showing, but on the shoulder pad not so much. So just do multiple thin coats, be easy with it, go slow, take your time. I'm confident you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And just like with our Rhino hatch, we're going to be really focusing on the recess here, but we need to really make sure that plenty of that gray is showing through. We don't want to go overboard. And with that, it looks like we've got our black down. And we'll let it dry and we'll come back and spray our white. And with our pieces dry here, we're going to be coming in with our white color from the top. In this case, we're going to be using some Stynylrez Res White from Minotaur. You can use any white you want, though, as long as you're confident you can prep it to go through your airbrush. It's also worth noting that if you are preparing a paint to go through the airbrush, that you spray on the back of your hand first, just to make sure that it's coming out and you're getting the proper flow. It's better to ruin a glove than it is to spray on a model with paint that's not ready and ruin it. To kick things off here, we're going to begin by working with our Rhino hatch, and it's worth noting that it is easier to maneuver the model so that you can get a good angle of attack with your paint than it is to come at it from a different angle with the airbrush sometimes. So in this case, we've got the Rhino hatch inverted so that I can get a nice angle on where I want to spray the white from. So we're going to be coming in from the top here, and similar to where we laid down the black, we're going to lay down a couple of thin coats here, trying to be well aware of where the white's going and get a nice gradient, a nice fade, a nice transition. But again, we want to make sure that plenty of that gray showing through, plenty of that black still down to the bottom. We don't want to go overboard here. We want to make sure we're getting this awesome gradient. Adjust our angle of attack here and apply a last little bit of white to get our high point done. And there we go. We've got our transition from dark to light, and we've still got our gray in the middle. Now we're going to be transitioning here over to a Space Marine shoulder pad, and when we do so, we're going to be lowering the PSI on our air compressor. It's worth mentioning that each paint, each compressor, each airbrush functions a little bit differently, so don't be afraid, but you are going to have to tinker. The worst thing that happens is that you make a mistake, but don't think of it as a mistake. Think of it as a happy little accident, a way that you've learned something, you've gained some knowledge, and you're honing a tool that's going into your painting tool chest. So let's go ahead and come at our shoulder pad here with the lowered PSI, and we're going to be applying some white paint from the top. The top I'm referencing here is the high point of the shoulder pad, but just like with our Space Marine hatch over there, we want to make sure that we're applying a nice amount of white from the top here. We want to leave a decent amount of the gray in the middle and the black in the shadows. We don't want to go too heavy here and cover up all the work that we've done previously. Again, the whole point of this is to create a gradient that we're going to be able to exploit when we get ready to use our blue. So now that we've got both of these done, we're going to let them dry, and we'll come back in with some blue paint. With our paints dry here, it's time to see this effect in action. For that, we're going to be applying some blue from the top. The blue we're going to be using is Game Extra Opaque from Vallejo, Heavy Blue. Now, you can use any blue you like, but this is the blue we're going to be using. You know, if you wanted to do a different color, maybe some Blood Angels or some Salamanders or any other chapter, you can use this gradient as well. But in this case, we're going to be using the Vallejo color. It is not airbrush ready, so we are going to have to thin it and then apply it. With our airbrush prepared heavy blue from Vallejo, we can now lay down some colors on the miniatures that we've prepped. Now, with the nature of airbrushing, we're really going to be exploiting this gradient because this paint's going to go on semi-translucent. The dark spots are going to be a dark blue or dark whatever color you place, and the center is going to be a lighter color than the dark one, and then from the top where it's super bright, it's going to be a much brighter version. Just like we've done previously, the key to this is to make sure we've got our paint thinned down and we apply multiple thin coats. That being said, let's get started. I like to start at the bottom of the miniature where the dark areas are because I'm impatient. I like to see that nice transition immediately. But like we've done previously in this tutorial so far, we've applied multiple thin coats, working our way up the model here, being sure to not focus on one spot too much. As we're going up the sides and the rest of the model, we're making sure to not over-apply paint in any one area. We don't want it to pull, we don't want it to run. Remember, with airbrushing, just be patient, go slow, be calm. It's better to take some extra time now to work on the miniatures than to rush it and make a mistake and have to come back and fix it later. As we've mentioned before in this tutorial, make sure you're constantly aware of your angle of attack in regards to airbrushing. Moving the miniature makes it a lot easier to get in there and get into all those recesses with your airbrush, much easier than it is sometimes for moving the airbrush to get into some awkward oblique angle. With that, we've got our miniature finished. We've got all the sides done, and it's looking good. But we are going to be coming in with some lighter paint from the top later once this dries. But as you can see, we've got the nice gradient at the bottom, transitioning into a blue. And as that dries, we're going to go ahead and get ready to prep our shoulder pad. Just like we did with the Rhino hatch with the shoulder pad, we're going to start at the bottom in the shadowed area because I really like to see that transition in color really quickly. But it's important to note to not only focus on doing thin coats and working your way up the model here, but make sure not to oversaturate any one area. And that's not just because you don't want paint that pools up and runs, but also because even though the paints are translucent, if you apply too much paint to one area, even in thin coats, you will start to lose some of that gradient effect that you built up earlier. And with that, it looks like we've got a nice transition here from light to dark. And now at this point, you could call it good. You could prepare these for some light weathering, some decals. You know, maybe if these are for your tanks, you might want to decide to come in and do a little bit of dry brushing on this Rhino hatch. But for me, I like to come in and push the contrast a little bit more, so we're going to spray a little bit of light blue from the top to really just tie these together. I struggle doing contrast, and it's something you have to practice, but I'm confident if you guys you know, take these techniques and practice, you can get some cool looking models too. So at this point, we've got our blue down on our hatches here, and you can see a subtle transition across the model. You can see the model is going from a light blue to a dark blue on the hatch, as well as a light blue to a dark blue on our shoulder pad. That being said, these miniatures could look a little bit better if we push the contrast on them, and because we're using airbrush, why not? We can come in with a little bit of a lighter blue from the top here, and that'll help us push some contrast and push the light source that's directly hitting the model from the top. To achieve this effect, we're essentially going to be mixing a little bit of white into our previous blue color so that we get a lighter blue. You can do this with whatever colors you're working with. Just make sure that you are essentially having a trifecta of colors, a dark into a light into a much lighter color. That's essentially what we've been doing and why we did the gradients in the first place. With the final step here, we're going to adjust our angle of attack as we've done before, and we're really going to be targeting the top portion of this hatch here. We really want that light color blue to be right there, but we're going to be careful, as we were with the previous steps, to not overdo it. We don't want to lose some of the gradation that we worked so hard to get. As usual, make sure you're doing thin, light coats, smooth passes, and you can get a nice transition from that dark blue to light blue. Look at that right there. If I can do it, you can do it. With airbrushing, you definitely can spend a lot of time, but in this case, if we wanted to push the contrast even more, we could come in with a ghost tint or an ink and really push that dark shadow. You could even do some more at the top if you wanted to, by coming in with some more lighter colors and really pushing that. Just all depends on how much time you want to spend. With that, we're going to come over to our shoulder pad here, get our angle of attack ready, and this one's going to be a little bit more tricky than the Rhino hatch was because the surface there is very, very small. So make sure you have your PSI adjusted. You apply a thin coat here and really be careful to not overdo it. As you can see, this effect is very easy, very simple, and we've got our transition from light blue to dark blue on both pieces, and now these are ready to go. All you won't have to do is come in with some weathering, some decals. Sky's the limit. Alright, so with the blue laid down, I think we're at a perfect stopping point. I'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with me today during my first video tutorial for Death Ray Designs, and if there's anything that we can improve, we'd encourage you to sound off in the comments below. We really do take your positive critiques to heart, and we want to continue to push the quality forward, and we'd also like to know what you guys would like to see. So if there's something we haven't done yet, or a particular technique you'd like to see us do, sound off below. Additionally, if you happen to have used these techniques on some of your miniatures, make sure you check us out on Facebook. Send us those images. Maybe check out our Facebook group, The Garrison, or if you happen to be on Instagram, tag us over there and we'll check those out as well. If you want to support what we're doing over here, make sure you check out deathraydesigns.com. Anything you do over there helps keep the lights going and helps keep me employed so I can keep producing content for you guys. So I'd like to thank you guys one more time for hanging out today. I encourage you to like, subscribe to the channel, ding that little bell if you haven't already so you get notifications when new videos go up, and hopefully we'll catch you next time. As always, happy wargaming.